I'm going to share with you a couple different ways you could collect feedback. And two things I would recommend is don't bombard your network with all three or four of these things. They'll just get tired of giving you feedback. But also, you want to use a tool or a format that is appropriate for your product, service, or solution. And depending on the maturity level of where it is as well, you're going to use different tools. So it's hard for me to tell you exactly right now what tool is best for your specific situation. But if there is a situation, please drop in the educator to entrepreneur community the question you have around collecting feedback. But at a high level, I think we're all familiar with surveys and different types. The tricky thing about surveys is you really have to be careful about how you write the question, right? Like, same thing's true with assessments in the classroom, right? That's why we hire psychometricians to write test questions, because there is a way to write questions that produces a specific result. And if you don't do it the right way, you're going to get a biased response. Interviews, the same thing. Like the interview is just a different form, a platform for asking questions. And so again, I think you really need to think about how you're going to ask questions to drive the kind of feedback that you want, because we do have a human and natural tendency to go for confirmation bias. And then, the other is just user testing, and that's doing click testing for a product, or you're sitting in the back of the room and kind of observing the way people interact with your experience. And that's another way to do it. And it's a bit more costly to do user testing, but also it's very different when you're in the room and you're looking over someone's shoulder to see how they're using a product versus when your product goes to market and you're not there. And so, again, it's great for a certain type of feedback, but it's not going to solve all of the things, even in a workshop. When someone has to implement your workshop on their own, it's just different than when you're facilitating, you just have a lot more fluency around the content that you're delivering. So make sure that the way you collect feedback aligns to your goals, and make sure that you get a diverse set of conditions that allow you to consider, maybe in the early adopter stage, you're going to implement a certain way. Maybe in a later stage, you're going to implement a different way. Perhaps these points seem a bit obvious, but um, I've been in many situations when people have asked me to give feedback on their product or service, and I've been bombarded with 30, 40, 50 questions and an hour-long interview, going from everything from the problem solution to implementation strategies to design, their marketing, their website, um, and the content. So it ends up being all encompassing, and quite frankly, like in even a 30, 45-minute conversation, it's just impossible for me to consume all of that information and help provide constructive feedback other than something that's just my reaction at the time, just because there's so many things coming at me. And so what we recommend is that you try to keep it as simple and focused as possible, so that you could really dig into the particular assumption that you're working on to get feedback around, whether it's the usability or it's the messaging or it's how you implement something or the customer experience. Just focus on one of those things so that you could really deep dive and get the kind of feedback that you want. Um, and for example, like sometimes you think that if you got from feedback from an expert on all of these things, that that would be really valuable for you. But what happens is that the feedback is just too broad and too reactionary. And so there are some important pieces of your solution or product that really probably needs that kind of feedback. And you don't want to waste time working on all aspects of it all at once. You work on the core assumption that you're thinking about right now, and then try to get feedback on that. And then once you solve that problem, you could iterate on the next set of problems. All right, so now the hard part. Now that you understand the importance of early customer engagement, networking, and getting that feedback, I want you to schedule some meetings with some potential early adopters in your network, whether they're the decision maker or the end user. Aim for getting concrete feedback using one of the different prototyping methodologies that we talked about earlier. And what we want you to do is capture that information, get the findings and analyze it, and then be ready to iterate. And that's going to take you to the next level in your entrepreneurial journey. What you have to ask yourself is, how many meetings do you really need to have in order to validate your prototype? And frankly, it just depends on your experience and the size of your network. But for example, as you think about your prototype, with 10 meetings qualify where you get enough feedback to make the next iteration. So think about that. Well, booking 10 meetings isn't easy, right? So you might have to reach out to 20, 30 people in order to book those 10 meetings, and that will happen over a given set of weeks. So start reaching out now, thinking about who the right people are, make it as broad as possible, and then get the meetings that you need in order to get the feedback. Or whether you're sending surveys out to your network, that's a different strategy. But you can also send surveys out, and you might send surveys out to all of your network, but not everybody in your network is going to respond to the survey. So how many responses do you need in order for that feedback to make sense for you to analyze and get valuable input? Again, thinking about it that way.